Go ahead. Judge me if you want, but be honest first. If you spent 6 years married to a man who made every simple thing harder, would you not try to guide him too? I was not cruel. I was the only adult in that marriage. When I left Daniel at that gas station, I called it a lesson because some people need structure before they understand respect. He just stood by the pump, touching that old phone case like he always did when he had nothing smart to say. By the time I reached my friends, I was sure he was finally learning. Go ahead, judge me if you want, but be honest first. My name is Renata Voss. I am 34, and I teach adults how to communicate like grown people. Of course, that made people uncomfortable when I used the same standards at home. I was not cruel to Daniel. I was the only adult in that marriage. Some people need structure before they understand respect, and my husband needed more structure than most. When I left him at that gas station, I called it a lesson because that is what it was. He just stood by the pump, touching that old phone case like he always did when he had nothing smart to say. By the time I reached my friends, I was sure he was finally learning. Before you decide I was heartless, you should know Daniel was not always a problem to solve. In our first year, he came to every workshop I taught, even the free ones in the back room of the community centre where the heater clicked louder than my projector. He sat in the last row with coffee for me, cream already added, lid turned the right way so I would not spill it on my notes. He did not understand half of what I said. Be honest, Daniel barely knew the difference between a boundary and an excuse. But he showed up. Back then, I thought showing up was enough. Then my life grew. My classes filled. Women waited after sessions to ask how to speak to husbands who shut down, bosses who ignored them, families who drained them. I had answers, clear answers, useful answers. I wrote them in my leather notebook with a black pen because messy thoughts create messy lives. Daniel stayed the same. He still drove the same blue SUV his father left him. He still took too long to answer simple questions. He still treated silence like it was wisdom. Of course, when I asked what he wanted from our marriage, he looked at the floor and said he wanted us to stop making every small thing a lesson. That was his problem. He heard lesson and thought punishment. I heard lesson and thought love with structure. The first real crack happened after my Thursday evening workshop. The room smelled like dry markers and old coffee. Tessa, one of my newest students, stayed behind to ask about emotional accountability. Daniel came to pick me up and leaned near the door in his faded grey jacket, looking tired before he had earned the right to be tired. Tessa asked how couples should handle everyday mistakes. Daniel tried to joke about how he once missed the turn for our anniversary dinner and drove us 20 minutes the wrong way. I corrected him. Not cruelly, not loudly. I simply told Tessa the real issue had not been the wrong turn. The real issue was Daniel refusing guidance when I saw the mistake coming. I explained that some people treat correction like an attack because their ego is weak. Tessa nodded. Daniel stopped smiling. In the parking lot, under a buzzing light, he asked why I had to make him sound stupid in front of people. Soft voice. Late question. Same old Daniel. I told him I did not make him sound like anything. I described the pattern. He asked if every private mistake had to become a teaching example. I told him that if he learned faster, I would need fewer examples. He looked at me for a long second. Then his thumb moved to the edge of his phone case. That old black case had a crack near the camera. He touched it whenever he felt cornered. I knew the gesture well. It meant he was embarrassed. It meant he had no answer. It meant the lesson had landed. In the SUV, he placed the phone face down on the console. I almost laughed. Not because I enjoyed hurting him. I did not. But there was something childish about hiding a screen when nobody wanted to look at it. Some people need structure, and some people need to stop acting wounded every time structure arrives. At home, I opened my leather notebook and wrote a line for Saturday's workshop. People resist the truth when it threatens their comfort. Daniel stood in the living room doorway while I wrote. He asked if I still saw him as my husband or just another person to correct. I told him that was dramatic. He asked what had changed between us. I told him nothing had changed except my standards. He did not argue. That was another thing about Daniel. He could make silence feel like furniture. Heavy. Always there. Never useful. My phone buzzed. Mara asked how the workshop went. I told her it went well, except Daniel had acted injured because I told the truth. She replied that some men needed a wife, a teacher, and maybe a principal. I smiled. Daniel saw the smile and asked if I was talking about him. I told him of course not, because I was tired and did not owe him a full report on every conversation. He nodded once, touched the edge of his phone case again, and walked down the hall. I watched him go and felt irritation rise in my throat. Not guilt, irritation. Because I had spent years becoming the kind of woman people listened to, and somehow the man in my own house still treated my wisdom like noise. So I made a decision that night. If Daniel would not listen to explanations, the next lesson would need consequences. Not cruel ones, clear ones. The kind even he could understand. The next morning I started with small structure. Not a fight, not a punishment. Structure. I put 3 sticky notes on the fridge before Daniel woke up. One said to listen before reacting. One said not to make me repeat myself. One said respect the person who sees the bigger picture. Be honest, that was not abuse. That was effort. Daniel found them while making coffee. He stood in front of the fridge for too long, like the yellow squares were written in another language. Then he took his mug, touched the edge of his phone case, and asked if this was really how I wanted to live. I told him some people need structure until respect becomes natural. He asked if I meant him. Of course I meant him, but I told him that question proved the point. A mature person would hear guidance and not turn it into an attack. He did not answer. He only pulled 1 sticky note from the fridge, folded it once and set it beside the coffee machine. That quiet little act annoyed me more than yelling would have. By lunch, I had already decided to stop letting his moods control the house. I had a class to prepare. People depended on me. Tessa had sent me a message asking if Saturday's workshop would cover low-awareness partners, and I knew exactly why she asked. Women saw themselves in my lessons. They came to me because I said the things they were too scared to say. Daniel came into the living room while I was writing in my leather notebook. He asked if I had told people private things about us again. His voice was flat, careful, almost too careful. I told him I used patterns, not secrets. He said the pattern had his face on it. That was the kind of sentence Daniel liked. Small, sad, built to make me feel guilty without making him responsible for anything. I closed my notebook and told him that if he did not want to be used as an example, he should stop being one. He touched his phone case again, thumb on the cracked edge. Eyes down. I knew that look. Embarrassment wearing a calm mask. Then he asked me to send him the rules in a voice note. For a second, I almost smiled too openly. Finally something was landing. He said he wanted to hear them in my words so he could understand what I expected. Some wives would have mocked that. I did not. I recorded it right there. I told him that respect meant listening the first time. I told him that resistance was not personality. I told him that a wife who understands life should not have to drag her husband through basic maturity. He stood there and listened. When I finished, he asked if that was all. I told him it was a start. That evening, Mara and I met at the old diner Daniel and I used to visit on Sundays. The window table was open, the one he always reserved because I once said I liked watching people walk by. I took it without thinking much of that. Old habits are not sacred just because they are old. Mara arrived with sunglasses in her hair and the kind of smile that made every complaint feel like a performance. She asked if my student had improved. I knew she meant Daniel. I told her he had asked for a voice note of my rules. Mara laughed and said some men needed a wife, a teacher, and maybe a principal. I laughed too because it was true in the way funny things are true. Tessa joined us after class. She was quieter than Mara, but she listened hard. That was why I liked her. She understood that growth was not soft. I told them Daniel had been acting wounded since the workshop. I explained that he hated correction because he had never learned how to receive it. I did not mention the parking lot. I did not mention that he had asked why private mistakes had to become teaching examples. That part was not useful to the point. Be honest, every story has details that distract from the lesson. Mara said I needed to stop carrying him emotionally. Tessa stirred her tea and asked if Daniel ever got to teach me anything. I smiled because she was young. I told her marriage was not about taking turns pretending both people had equal wisdom. Sometimes one person sees farther. The loving thing is to lead. Daniel called while we were still at the diner. I let it ring once before answering because I did not want him thinking I was waiting for him. He asked if I was coming home soon. I told him I was having dinner with people who valued growth. He asked if that meant he did not. Calm, specific, tired. He named the workshop again. He said he had not minded the story about the wrong turn. He had minded the way I made his shame useful to strangers. I heard the old weakness under it. I told him shame only stays shame when people refuse to learn from it. He asked if I could speak to him as my husband, not as a case study. I told him I would when he stopped behaving like one. Mara lifted her eyebrows and mouthed that he was proving my point. I felt seen. After the call, I opened my notebook and wrote another line. Consequences teach faster than explanations. The sentence looked stronger than the first one. On the drive home, I replayed the voice note in my head and felt proud of myself. Daniel had finally asked for the rules. Maybe not with the right attitude, but still. Progress often starts ugly. That was something I told my students all the time. When I got home, Daniel was in the living room, sitting in the dark with only the hallway light behind him. His phone was on his knee, face down. He asked if I had enjoyed making him small at dinner too. I told him he was being dramatic again. He said he had not been at dinner. I told him he did not need to be. His behavior was always there before he was. He looked at me for a while, then placed one folded sticky note on the coffee table. The one about respecting the person who sees the bigger picture. He asked if I believed respect could ever go both ways. I told him respect did go both ways. I gave guidance. He had the chance to receive it. He touched the cracked edge of his phone case and said nothing else. That silence used to bother me. That night, it only confirmed what I already knew. Daniel was not ready for a conversation. He was ready for a consequence. And I was already thinking about the road trip. The road trip was supposed to be simple. Daniel had a medical appointment 2 towns over, and I agreed to drive because he always got quiet after appointments. He said he could drive himself. I told him of course he could, but the goal was not proving he had hands. The goal was getting there without him missing turns, taking wrong exits, or turning one normal day into another lesson he refused to learn. He did not argue. He sat in the passenger seat of the blue SUV, his father's old one, with his appointment papers folded in his lap. His thumb rested near the cracked edge of his phone case. I saw it from the corner of my eye and almost told him to stop fidgeting like a boy waiting outside the principal's office. But I was trying to be generous that morning. Be honest, I had been generous for years. The highway was flat and bright. Heat shimmered over the road, and the air conditioner made that soft, tired sound old cars make when they are trying. Daniel looked out the window. I asked what the doctor said. He said it was nothing urgent, just something to monitor. I told him monitoring only worked when people followed instructions. He said he knew. I asked if he did. He turned his face toward me then. Calm. Too calm. He asked if I could go one day without turning every sentence into a test. That was the problem with Daniel. He always wanted the benefit of my mind, but none of the weight of it. He wanted a wife who noticed everything, planned everything, prevented everything. But he hated when that same wife expected him to improve. I told him some people need structure because love alone does not make them better. He asked if I ever heard myself when I said things like that. I told him I heard myself clearly. That was why people came to my workshops. That ended the conversation for a while. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was Luca, sending a short clip from his morning seminar. The title on the screen said that low-awareness people only respected consequences. I smiled before I meant to. Daniel saw it. He asked if that was the coach again. I told him Luca was a professional who understood growth language. Daniel asked if growth language was what I called being talked down to now. I laughed once, not because it was funny, because it was so small. He was jealous of vocabulary. By the time we left the appointment, I already knew I would not take him straight home. Mara had invited me to her patio later, and I wanted to stop by for an hour. Daniel said he was tired and asked if we could skip it. He said he did not want to sit there while my friends treated him like one of my workshop examples. That should tell you something. He knew how he behaved. He knew what people saw. He simply wanted me to hide it better. I told him we would stop for gas first. The station sat near the edge of the highway, with 2 pumps, a small shop, and a freezer outside full of half-melted ice cream bars. The pavement looked soft from heat. The smell of gasoline came through the open window before I even parked. I pulled beside pump 3. Daniel reached for the door handle, then paused. He asked why I had stopped there when we still had almost half a tank. I told him because responsible people do not wait for empty. He looked at the dashboard, then at me. I gave him the instructions, slowly. I told him to fill the tank, check the tires, go inside, pay, and take the receipt. I told him not to forget to put the nozzle back properly because I was not going to explain that twice. He asked why I was speaking to him like that. Soft voice again, small wounded face. I told him because he kept proving he needed it. He opened the door. The heat hit him at once. He stepped out with the appointment papers still in one hand, then put them on the seat and closed the door. For a moment he stood beside the SUV and looked at me through the window. His thumb moved to the edge of his phone case. There it was again. That little signal. That tiny confession. He had no answer, so his body went looking for comfort. I watched him walk to the pump. He lifted the red nozzle, the hose dragged against the concrete. He looked tired in the sun, ordinary and slow, like a man who had spent years being carried by a woman and still complained about the weight. My phone buzzed again. Mara asked if I was still coming. I looked at Daniel through the mirror. He was standing with one hand on the pump, waiting for the numbers to climb. And the idea came clean. Not wild, not cruel. Clean. A lesson only works if the student feels the consequence. I picked up my phone and recorded a short video for Mara. I kept my voice light. I said Daniel was about to receive a practical lesson in listening. I said some men understood words, and some men needed pavement. Then I stopped recording and placed the phone in the cup holder. My hand moved to the gear shift. For 1 second, Daniel looked up. The nozzle was still in his hand. The red handle clicked off. He took it out, turned toward the car, and I saw his mouth form my name through the glass. I smiled. Not sweetly, not angrily. Like a teacher who finally sees the student reach the hard part. Then I drove. The SUV rolled forward slowly at first. I did not speed. I did not panic. I gave him time to understand. In the side mirror, Daniel stood beside the pump with the red nozzle hanging near his leg. He did not run after me. He did not wave his arms. He did not shout across the station like a man in a movie. He just stood there. Then he lifted his phone. Of course he did. Probably to call me. Probably to make his voice soft and tired and wounded again. Probably to ask how I could do this, as if the answer had not been sitting between us for years. I turned onto the highway before he could finish whatever performance came next. The air inside the SUV changed once I was alone. The passenger seat was empty. His appointment papers were still there, folded on the leather. His coffee cup was in the holder. His jacket was bunched near the door. For the first time all day, the car felt peaceful. I sent Mara the video and added that he would have a few miles to think. She answered with laughing emojis first. Then she asked if I was serious. I did not like that question. I recorded another voice note while driving. I told her I was completely serious. I said Daniel had spent 6 years ignoring simple guidance and today he was going to learn with his feet. I said heat, distance, and silence might do what my patients could not. Some people need structure. Some need consequences. Daniel needed both. At a red light, I opened my leather notebook on the passenger seat. It was not safe, maybe, but I only needed one line. I wrote it quickly under the last sentence. A lesson only works if the student feels the consequence. My hand shook once when I closed the notebook. Not from doubt, from adrenaline. There is a difference. I reached Mara's street feeling lighter than I had in months. I imagined Daniel walking along the highway, sweating through that grey shirt, finally understanding that I was not a woman he could ignore forever. I imagined him coming home dusty and quiet. I imagined asking what he had learned and watching him search for an answer worthy of me. That was the part I wanted most. Not pain, recognition. I wanted him to say that I had been right. When I parked outside Mara's house, I checked my phone. Daniel had called once. No message, no long complaint, no dramatic text. That made me smile even more. Maybe the lesson was already working. Mara's patio was already set up when I arrived. 2 glasses with ice, a bowl of strawberries. Her phone propped against a candle jar because Mara liked recording everything she called iconic. Of course, I did not mind. Some people need structure, and some stories need witnesses. I stepped out of the SUV with Daniel's appointment papers still on the passenger seat and my leather notebook under my arm. Mara looked past me first, toward the empty seat. She asked where Daniel was. I told her he was learning. Mara laughed, but not as fast as usual. Elise was there too, sitting under the umbrella with her arms crossed. Tessa had come from class and still had her notebook bag at her feet. They all looked at me like they were waiting for the punchline, so I gave them one. I told them Daniel had been disrespectful all morning. I told them he kept resisting simple guidance. I told them I left him at the gas station so he could understand that actions have consequences. Be honest, I expected more laughter. Mara gave a small laugh because Mara always knew how to support the room. Tessa looked down at her tea. Elise did not smile at all. She asked if Daniel had water. That annoyed me. I told her he was a grown man, not a toddler. Elise said the highway was hot and the gas station was far from town. I told her distance was the point. A short walk would not teach him anything. Mara lifted her phone a little, still recording. I liked that. I wanted Daniel to see the recap later. I wanted him to hear how calm I sounded, how clear I was, how foolish his resistance looked when explained by someone who understood people. So I leaned toward the camera and said Daniel had spent 6 years ignoring lessons, and today his feet could do what his ears refused to do. Tessa whispered that it sounded harsh. I told her harsh and clear were not the same thing. Then Daniel called. His name appeared on my screen, plain and small. I let it ring long enough for everyone to see it. Then I answered on speaker because I had nothing to hide. He asked if I had meant to leave him there. His voice was not angry. That was what irritated me most. No heat, no fight. Just that flat calm, like he was already tired of the answer before he heard it. I told him of course I meant it. I told him lessons do not work when the student gets to choose the difficulty. He asked me to say it clearly. For 1 second, the patio went too quiet. Mara's phone was still pointed at me. The ice in my glass cracked. Even Elise stopped moving her hand over the strawberry bowl. Something about Daniel's question felt too clean, too exact. Like he was not asking because he did not know. Like he needed the words placed somewhere. His thumb was probably on that cracked phone case, I thought. Nervous again. Trying to make me feel cruel. So I closed that door in my mind. I told him yes, I drove away on purpose because some people need consequences before they respect guidance. There. Clean. Mature. Honest. He was silent for a moment. Then he asked if I was bringing the SUV home. I almost laughed. That was what he cared about. Not the lesson, not the marriage, the car. His father's blue SUV, as if I had not kept that old thing running with my reminders, my appointments, my planning. I told him I would bring it home when I was done. He asked nothing else. The call ended. Mara lowered her phone, slower this time. Elise stood and said she had to go. No speech, no dramatic exit. Just her bag over her shoulder and her eyes not meeting mine. I told myself she was sensitive. Tessa said she should leave too because she had class notes to finish. That was a lie, but I let her have it. Young women often confuse discomfort with morality. Mara stayed, but even she was quieter. She asked if I was sure Daniel would not make this bigger than it was. I told her Daniel did not make things bigger. Daniel made himself smaller and waited for me to fix the room around him. That was the truth. Mostly. I opened my leather notebook and tapped the line I had written at the red light. A lesson only works if the student feels the consequence. Mara read it and gave me a small nod. Not the old kind, not the bright kind, but enough. I decided I would go home later, after Daniel had more time to think. I would not rush the lesson because a rushed consequence becomes a favor. When he finally walked through our door, dusty and humbled, I would ask him one simple question. What did you learn? And for once, I expected him to answer correctly. I stayed on Mara's patio longer than I needed to. That was part of the lesson too. If I rushed home after leaving Daniel there, he would think his discomfort controlled my schedule. Be honest, that had been our whole marriage. He got quiet. I adjusted. He looked hurt. I softened. He refused to grow, and somehow I became the cruel one for noticing. Not that day. That day, I finished my drink. I answered 2 messages from my workshop group. I even sent Luca a short version of what happened, leaving out the part where Elise had acted like I had left a child in the desert. Luca replied that low-awareness people often confuse consequences with harm. I read that twice. There it was. Language for what I already knew. Mara had gone inside to take a call. When she came back, she did not sit as close to me. She asked if maybe I should check where Daniel was now. I told her Daniel was exactly where his choices had put him. She asked if I wanted her to drive back with me. I said no. Some people need structure, and witnesses make weak men perform. Daniel needed to come home after thinking, not after collecting sympathy. Mara nodded, but her eyes moved to her phone. The recording was still there. I could see the little thumbnail of myself leaning toward the patio table, explaining the lesson like a woman with control. I liked that image. So I decided to make one more video before I went home. I sat in the driver's seat of the blue SUV, with the door open and the late sun hitting the dashboard. Daniel's appointment papers were still on the passenger seat. His jacket was still bunched near the door. My leather notebook lay open on top of it all. I pressed record. I said Daniel had spent years mistaking my patience for permission. I said he could walk, sweat, think, and come home with a better answer than silence. I said the SUV was safer with the person who knew where she was going. Of course, I smiled at the end. Not because it was funny, because I was calm. I sent the video to the group chat. Mara saw it first, then Tessa, then Elise. The little read marks appeared one after another. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody sent applause. I told myself that was because the lesson had become serious enough to respect. Then Daniel called. I almost did not answer. I wanted him to sit with the consequence longer. But a good teacher knows when to let the student speak. His voice was quiet when he asked if I was still with Mara. I told him that was not the point. He asked if I had posted anything or sent anything about what I did. Not angry, not begging, specific. I told him he was still trying to manage the lesson instead of learning from it. He asked if I could come back to the gas station, pick him up and talk to him like my husband. For one small second, I heard the tiredness under his calm. Not weakness, tiredness. But then I remembered all the years of silence, all the evenings where I had begged for conversation and he gave me a wall, all the times I had carried the emotional work while he sat there making quiet look noble. So I gave him the one thing he could not argue with. I told him he had made me feel alone for years because he shut down every time I needed a partner. I told him I became the voice, the plan, the map, and the adult because he disappeared inside himself. I told him I was tired of being punished for being the only one willing to lead. He did not answer right away, because he knew that part was true. That was what people miss about me. I was not wrong about everything. Daniel's silence had teeth. It cut slowly, but it cut. Then he asked again if I would come back. I told him no. Cleanly. I told him I would not rescue him from a lesson he earned. I told him he could call a ride, walk, or finally think. I told him I would be home when I was done. He said he would handle it properly. That almost made me laugh. Properly. Such a Daniel word. Careful, grey, folded at the edges. He said it like a man trying to sound strong without doing anything strong. I asked if he wanted me to feel scared. He said no. I asked if he wanted the car back. He asked if I was bringing the SUV home. I told him yes, because unlike him, I finished what I started. He went quiet. There it was again. That shrinking silence, that final little surrender. I ended the call first. When I checked the group chat, Mara had read my last 3 messages and said nothing. I sent her a laughing face. Then another message asking if she had suddenly joined Daniel's victim club. She read that too. No answer. Fine. People loved clarity when it was aimed at someone else. They became soft when it had a name. I started the SUV and pulled away from Mara's curb. The leather notebook slid against Daniel's jacket, and the page with my line stayed open. A lesson only works if the student feels the consequence. I drove home with the windows down. Warm air pushed through the car. The empty passenger seat looked peaceful beside me. I imagined Daniel arriving later, dusty and quiet. I imagined him standing in the doorway waiting for permission to speak. I imagined asking what he had learned, and this time, I would not help him find the answer. When I turned onto our street, I was not worried. I was ready. Daniel had finally gone quiet enough to learn. The police car was parked in front of our house. At first, I thought one of the neighbours had called about something else. Mrs. Calder stood on her porch with her arms folded. Mara sat beside me and did not speak. The blue SUV rolled into the driveway, and there was Daniel. Not on the highway, not sweating through his shirt, not humbled. He stood near the porch with Officer Hayes and another officer beside him. His face was calm. Too calm. Of course, Daniel always knew how to look small when other people were watching. I stepped out with my leather notebook in one hand and asked what this was supposed to be. Daniel touched the cracked edge of his phone case. Then he smiled. Not wide, not warm, just enough. He told Officer Hayes that I always called them lessons. He said the first useful lesson I ever gave him was that when someone refused accountability, you kept proof. My hand went to the open car door. I kept it there. Officer Hayes asked if I was Renata Voss and if I had driven the SUV from the gas station. I told him, be honest, this was a marriage issue, not a police issue. I said my husband was dramatic. I said some people need structure before they understand respect. Daniel did not interrupt. He only lifted his phone. That was when the small pieces began to line up where I did not want them. The phone face down after my workshop, the voice note where I gave him my rules, the video I sent Mara from the gas station, the pump camera, Mara's patio recording, my group chat, my last video in the driver's seat, his question about whether I was bringing the SUV home. None of it was hidden. I had simply named it wrong. Officer Hayes asked if I had left him there on purpose. I started to explain the lesson, but Mara looked down at her phone. She did not help me. She did not laugh. She did not even say my name. Daniel said I was his wife, and that made it worse, not better. He said he trusted me with his father's SUV after his appointment. He said I drove away without his consent, left him on the highway, admitted why, and brought the vehicle back like proof with keys. I told the officer it was a joke. Officer Hayes said jokes usually had 2 people laughing. That sentence left no room for my voice. Mara gave the recording when asked and left without hugging me. Later, Luca posted that unsafe relationship behavior had no place in real growth work, then unfollowed me before midnight. The police report led to a no-contact order, and Daniel filed a divorce petition the next morning. I slept in my sister's spare room because Daniel would not let me return without an officer present. Our shared accounts were frozen for review after his attorney added the report to the file. Elise stopped answering, Tessa left my workshop group, and Mara sent one message saying she could not be part of this. Luca turned my name into a warning without using it. The Learning Centre removed me from Saturday's communication class after the video reached 3 parents. I still want to say Daniel made me hard. I still want to say his silence trained me to become loud. Maybe that part is true. But I left him at a gas pump to prove I was the teacher, and he let my own lesson explain me better than I ever explained myself. My leather notebook came back with my things, open to the page about consequences. I left him at the pump to make him learn my lesson, and the only student who came home was me.